Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the March Ordinary Council meeting. I would like to begin by inviting Councillor James to do the Welcome to Country.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe, and my fellow councillors. Firstly, I pay my respects to our ancestors. I acknowledge our elders, both past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the Yorta Yorta Nations and all its people whose land we meet on here today. So on behalf of the Elders Council, the 16 family groups and the 8 respected tribes that share as custodians of the land, I say a very warm welcome to country.
Thank you very much, Councillor James. I'd also like to add that we, Greater Shepparton City Council, acknowledge the Yorta Yorta peoples of the land, which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay our respect to their tribal elders, we celebrate their continuing culture, and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Item number 3 is a privacy notice. This public meeting is being streamed live via our Facebook page and made available for public access on our website, along with the official minutes of this meeting. Item 4, which is the governance principles, there is 1 to 9 items listed there in the agenda. Item 5, apologies, we have nil received. Item 6, declarations of conflict of interest. Do we have any declarations tonight that need to be declared?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I note that as from today, the 16th of March, I'm declaring a conflict of interest in agenda item 11.3, the adoption of the Shepparton-Maribna 2050 Regional Growth Plan due to a material conflict of interest.
Thank you very much. Item number 7, which is the confirmation...
Mayor O'Keefe, I'll declare an interest in report 14.2, it's the CEO's remuneration.
Thank you very much. Item number 7, the confirmation of minutes of the previous meetings. Is any item of the minutes opposed? Would someone like to move the recommendation on page 7 that the minutes of the 16th February 2021 council meeting as circulated be confirmed?
I'll move that the minutes of the 16th of February 2021 council meeting as circulated be confirmed.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Abdullah. All in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 8, item 9.1, the Reconciliation Action Plan 2019 to 2020 report and future directions. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor James.
Thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 8, 9.1, that the council note the achievements of the Reconciliation Action Plan 2019 to 2020 and Point 2, the engagement approach identified for the development of Council's next Reconciliation Action Plan.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Spinks. Thank you very much. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Our council is one of 15 councils throughout Victoria that has engaged in Reconciliation Action Plans, so that's very, very encouraging. Out of the 79 councils, so that's says exactly what the positive steps we are doing in our area. It was implemented in June in 2019. The plan has been a huge success with regards to achieving outcomes for our Koori community and the council in a combined approach, in a reconciliation approach. A report on the first stage of the action plan details the successes achieved and indicates positive and proactive outcomes. So that's been a great outcome for our Koori community. I look forward to the next stage of the plan, which will guide us for the future direction in regards to building on the achievements to date.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to just mention that this is a strong start, and I'm looking forward to the second stage being undertaken. The achievements to date are very worthy, and it's a strong foundation to build upon. I think it's always clear, of course, that we can and we should do more in this space, but the collaboration and the leadership from the Aboriginal community in creating and drafting and consulting for this process and this plan is to be commended, and I think speaks to the strength of the plan itself and what we can achieve by having a really solid wrap within the council.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd just like to add to the motion and thank Councillor James for moving that. Words are very good, it's really in the actions. And of course, there's some key achievements that have been done, and there's certainly been progression, and certainly working towards a better reconciliation outcome all around. I'm reminded of the 4 R's, and that is recognising certainly the past, realising where we've come and where we're at this point in time, the relationships, the building of that capacity, and the other R being the respect in the community of Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as well as council and non-council people in working together. Having Councillor James here and just being here enhances those 4 R's as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
I think there's some great actions to come from this, as everyone said, and obviously it has my ongoing support. We have found that it can be difficult to moderate competing voices at times in this plan. There's a risk that politically organised groups can drown out other groups who aren't quite as forthright in their opinions. We, as an authority, must be mindful of all perspectives and consult widely before we initiate any action. It's a process that takes time, and this is a great start. Essentially, we're attempting to dismantle generations of distrust for authorities that continue to oppress Indigenous people and disconnect them from their land. So there's really no quick fix here, but we do invite everyone to take a seat at the table, because what happens during these early stages and early conversations will have a lasting impact moving forward. There is still so much that we do not know about Indigenous history and culture, but hopefully through this plan we can extend the wattle branch, so to speak, and reach an understanding. And I'm also personally very heartened by efforts from state and federal politics to hold these conversations in a broader sense to help bridge this gap. We're finally seeing higher level representation from Indigenous people in politics, including our very own first elected Indigenous councillor, Uncle Greg James. And we'll probably make some mistakes along the way, but with his guidance and with this plan progressing, I believe we'll make more positive change.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Sarley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. And look, following on from the really positive comments that my fellow councillors have made, as a newly elected councillor, I'm really looking forward to having an opportunity to contribute to the reconciliation plan. I want to make sure we continue to bring further awareness to the rich history within Greater Shepparton, and we're so fortunate, as Councillor Summer said, to have Councillor Greg James here with us to help, push that along further beyond the limits that it is currently now. And we need to continue to keep growing and showcasing the strong culture and values that are in place now.
Thank you very much. Would the other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Priestley?
I'd just like to remark that on the terrific progress the council and local Indigenous leaders have made towards reconciliation, and in particular compliment Peter and the executive on the effort that they've gone to achieve that. There's still more work to be done, and there's a lot more work to be done in our broader community. But I think the popular mood is changing, and that people are interested in this. It's important in the community. They want to do better. They want to have a more respectful relationship with Indigenous Australians, and that comes with dealing with our past and finding a common way to reconciliation in the future.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Dobson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I think it's important that Councillor James and the Aboriginal community generally throughout the Goulburn Valley know that this council is right behind the ongoing RAP, and that the Aboriginal community continues to grow in stature within the Goulburn Valley. And as leaders within the community, it's our duty to assist in that program wherever we can. And looking at some of the actions for the next plan, there's plenty of projects to do, and I'm heartened by the fact that our Chief Exec, Peter Harriott, has indicated that he's willing to increase where possible the number of Aboriginal people that are working within this organisation, not in the usual form, but in managerial and in-house job positions. So I look forward to that, and I congratulate the council, the previous council, on getting things done.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Abdullah, one left.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just quickly, I really appreciate all the comments that our councillors have made, and totally supportive of this reconciliation action plan. From the previous round, I just want to make sure that this reconciliation action plan actions are meant once we endorse the plan. It will be sort of, we are obliged to take those actions. So that plan is not there only for the name, for the, it's not going to be a tokenistic gesture. And every action that is included in the reconciliation action plan has to be actioned, just as we did in the first round. However, in the first round, there were some misunderstandings or some difference of opinion regarding whether one or some of the actions, whether they really needed to be actioned or not. So I'm just hoping that in this case, in this round, everybody will be on board and will understand that everything that is in the action plan has to be actioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 13, item 9.2, which is a Murchison Aged Care Investigation and Future Directions report. Prior to going to the motion, we did receive a letter from Damien Drum this afternoon, and I now invite Peter Harriott to respond to that.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yes, I also spoke to Damien on the phone tonight. So we acknowledge that he's written to us a fairly detailed letter talking about the various responses that we're after. So we'll work our way through that with the councillors over the next week or so. We'll also organise to meet with Damien face-to-face if we can, and try and, in greater detail, work through the issues that we need to, that are identified in this report. I think that was all I needed to report on.
Thank you very much. I would now ask a councillor who would like to move the motion. Councillor Abdullah.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move the motion, which is in addition to the recommendation on page number 13. I'll read out the motion.
Thank you.
The whole motion. That the council lodge an expression of interest to purchase the D.P. Jones Nursing Home in Murchison prior to the cut-off date of April 1st, 2021, at a value which is at the lesser of $700,000 and a qualified valuation less than 12 months old, prepared on a vacant possession basis for the property. This EOI, or expression of interest, will be subject to A, receipt of further information from the federal government and building consultants as requested and documented in the accompanying report for this agenda item, and B, due diligence and appropriate conditions as deemed necessary by the council, and will not commit the council to any contractual obligation until such time as these conditions are met. These conditions include, but are not limited to, and these are the conditions that are already in the printed agenda. Consider engaging a consultant to undertake a comprehensive feasibility study into the purchase of the Murchison Aged Care Facility, and undertake a further review of all information gathered and prepare a report for council to inform future decisions with regards to any proposal for the purchase of the facility.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Spinks. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I just wanted to highlight that that first of all acknowledge that this is an important matter not only for the Murchison community but for the whole of organisation, the council, and Greater Shepparton. And council has put this item on a very high priority for more than 2 months now. So every attention has been given to address all the concerns, and to come to a solution which is acceptable and which is the most which is the most appropriate solution given all the constraints. The intent of in the motion that I have moved, the intent of expression of interest is explicit, because I understand that the intent of expression of interest is implied in all the discussions and also in this report. but this motion makes it explicit while not changing any of the conditions of the original officer's recommendation. I believe the risk to council in carrying out this motion is not any more than what it already is under the original officer's recommendations. We know that expression of interest is not legally binding, so by taking this step with the safety net highlighted in this motion, we can assure our Murchison community that council is listening to them and is moving one step forward. And at the same time, it's able to set realistic expectations with the community that if the conditions mentioned here are not met, the EOI cannot be progressed. I'm putting this motion with the faith in the process and council's ability to carry out due diligence, and also to have a trust that the Murchison community will understand that council may or may not be able to continue further beyond the EOI, depending on the outcomes of the due diligence process. So that's all I have to say with regards to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson, did you have something to add?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. In the event that this motion is lost, I will be foreshadowing a motion that's in line with the recommendation that is printed on page 13 of the agenda. If you'd like, I'll read it out. If not, we'll wait till see what happens.
No, that's fine. We don't need to read it out. I think it's in front of us. No, it's fine. You don't need to read it out. That's
Thank you.
fine. If it's clear, everyone's got that in front of them. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I think Councillor Abdullah explained quite clearly, but just to expand, and because this is our first opportunity, I suppose, to present to the community of what the work we've been doing, this has been a very intensive back and forth learning process and discussion process of the complexities of the DP Jones nursing home issue. But this is the opportunity, while we still have risks and challenges potentially out there that we aren't aware of, this motion being put forward is our sign, I suppose, that we are hopeful that we can respond to a local need without being able to guarantee an outcome by putting in for the expression of interest. It's our way of showing that we are prepared to move forward, while it does also set clear outlines, but that we are moving forward, that we aren't worried that it will fail, that we are hopeful that it will succeed. This is responding to local need. One of the concerns, of course, is that this is something we haven't been involved in before. This is something local council doesn't necessarily always get involved in, but this is our local need. This is what our Murchison community has spoken to, is going through, and it's us recognising that and listening. And so while we are doing all due diligence on this issue, by putting in the EOI, it would be the next natural step. There is a closing of the EOI as of April 1st, so the time is coming along that we would need to make this decision. And it simply is an addition that talks, as Councillor Abdullah said, talks to the fact that we are looking into this and proceeding with the options that we can. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion?
Against the motion.
Against the motion, thank you.
So I commend Councillor Abdullah for her motion and note its healthy intent to try and support the community of Murchison. So our differences are not about intent, it's just about execution. My view is that we still have 2 weeks before we need to submit an expression of interest. This is still a live issue. We have still significant amounts of information to gather, and before we commit our ratepayers' money to any process, I think we should try and draw as much of that information together before we submit. There's no disadvantage in submitting that in a couple of weeks' time. I would seek to, with the support of fellow councillors, have a meeting around the 30th of the month, still before the 1st, and that would give us the opportunity to discuss the most up-to-date information before we moved ahead with any decision to participate in the expression of interest process. So if you think about this, we've got a commercial process. It's not going to kick off for 2 more weeks. It's a live issue. We've got a letter on the table here that we still haven't evaluated from our local member. We have the ability still to draw more information together before we formalise our position and go and put our best foot forward and do the best thing we can for our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak for the motion? Would any council wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Summer?
Yes, thank you. I've got a fair bit to get through, but
Okay.
I'll start by saying it's been a bit of a painful process so far. If a recommendation had come to us earlier about this, we may have already purchased the building and it would currently be operating. However, as time goes on, there seems to be less support for the facility. And I've seen this organisation move mountains when it wants to. But in this case, we seem to be dragging our heels and potentially uncovering risks that don't necessarily exist. I think it's a serious case of overthinking the matter and overcomplicating it. Councils are tasked with filling the gap between public need and private enterprise. And in this case, we have an opportunity to maintain a facility that's critical for the social and financial economy of Murchison. So most of us stood on an election platform of promising to value our small towns, and I'd wager we could not conjure up any project with more economic value than this facility. And this is the same council who built a $50 million art gallery, and we seem to be concerned about minor structural defects to a prominent building in the heart of Murchison. We are not being tasked with reinventing the wheel because all the infrastructure is there. All the networks are in place. The work has been done. We are simply the middlemen who will lease the building to a service provider, and we certainly don't need a lengthy and potentially expensive feasibility study to help us reach that conclusion. We do have enough resources to lift the standard if there was political will, but as it stands, there's no need to sink capital costs into a Rolls-Royce facility. The good people of Murchison don't necessarily want a Shep Villages. They want choice. So long as the building is compliant to a minimal standard, council is at minimal risk. However, right now there is an uncertain future for the medical centre, the community bus, men's shed, and 70 jobs in the township of Murchison. They stand to lose a lot more than that from the flow-on impact if we don't act urgently. 2 weeks is not a long time. And state government have bent over backwards to try and facilitate this transition, yet we're still waiting on snail mail correspondence to form a position. I call this death by 1,000 cuts because each undermining comment by naysayers puts doubt in our mind. So perhaps we should send a delegation to the Deputy PM's office if that's what it takes to get answers quickly. I think engaging in an expression of interest is the next logical step. All the bones are already in the report, including a ballpark figure of what we believe the building is worth. There is a rough valuation of $700,000 in this report. It's a steal, and that should be adequate. Otherwise, we may delay this process until after the deadline. And if we fail to lodge an expression of interest, I believe it will be perceived by the community as weak at best and negligent at worst. The expression of interest includes clauses.
Would you like an extension, Councillor Summer? Extension?
Yeah.
Everyone fine with that? Yep.
Okay.
You can proceed.
So point A and B of Councillor Abdullah's motion protects us from any kind of mistake in this matter, because any outstanding questions such as who's responsible for purchasing the beds can be dealt with. Expressions of interest are not legally binding, but it does send a supportive message to the Murchison community that we are doing everything possible to keep this facility open, that we see them, that we recognise their need. So I really hope we can stick by our word of valuing small towns and support this motion.
Thank you very much. Would any council... Sorry, Peter Harriet?
Mayor O'Keefe, I've got a comment about the lack of legal binding in an expression of interest. We have no idea whether our expression of interest will have legal binding until we actually see what the expression of interest is and how that ties with the expression of interest arrangements. So I just got to make that comment. Thank you.
Point of order. It was verbally communicated today that it was not going to be legally binding. And even if it was legally binding, the whole point of what I've just said is that I would support that.
All right, thank you. Would any council wish to speak against the motion?
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Dobson?
I think one of the things that we are all in unison on this issue is that we would all like to see the DP Jones facility or something akin to that be put into Murchison. And I would like the Murchison people to think that this council is doing its very best to try and iron out the bumps and hollows that we've got in order to get to a position that both Councillor Abdullah and Councillor Summer have alluded to. And I think both of them are correct in what they say, is that the facility would be fantastic. However, there are a couple of issues that come up, and one of them is this figure of $700,000 is around about the price for this property. Now, I don't know where that figure come from.
It's in the report.
It's in the report. I know it's in the report, but where the original figure came from, I don't know. Furthermore, there's another figure of $300,000 in the report that talks about the renovations to the building. Now, I would think, and I've seen the report, as we all have, of how much renovations to be done to bring this up to, turnkey standard. And the figure of $300,000, to my way of thinking, is vastly inadequate. And until we get a precise figure, I think we're in trouble. The other issue that bothers me is that at this stage, the person who is holding, the administrator, is holding all the chips. And some of the chips are 40 bed licences that he has got. Now, there is some thought that the federal government would buy these and transfer them over to a new provider. However, we don't have that in writing. We don't have in writing a valuation by which we can put our interest into the property. We don't know what that valuation is. We don't know whether it's high or low. We haven't got in writing as yet, we haven't got a figure from the federal government as to exactly how much is on the table. We've also received a letter from the proposed provider in recent times that says that he, in turn, is also looking for more surety in some of the verbal assurances that have been given. Now, we are talking about ratepayers' money here, or if the federal government come into being, it's taxpayers' money, not ours. And so we've got to be ultra careful. So while I sit with the speakers for the motion, I really do sit with them, all I'm doing is taking a conservative approach.
Time. Would you like an extension, Councillor Dobson?
I do, thank you.
All those in favour of that? Continue.
I sit with Councillor Priestley in the fact that we can get on our bike in the next 2 weeks and try and sort out some of these inconsistencies that we have at the moment. And there's a number of them, and I congratulate the Chief Executive Officer on the 10 issues that has been proposed here that are a bit of a barrier. So I want to see it happen, but I also want to see it done correctly.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Sally?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, this has obviously been spoken about for some time now, and we all know how important the aged care facility is to Murchison, but the positive flow-on effect spread far and wide within Greater Shepparton, and it has been acknowledged already. I like this positive motion that Councillor Abdullah has put forward to potentially give the Murchison aged care facility a second life, and I note there potentially. I really do appreciate the conservative approach, and I think that's important that that's noted, but it is just an expression of interest, so I support these steps forward.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Brophy?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. And I applaud Councillor Abdullah in putting forward the motion. I am about, and I think every councillor here is about supporting the Murchison community. And if the federal government can provide a grant through a funding stream that will facilitate this opportunity, and it doesn't impact on council other commitments and projects or allocated budgets, then why would we not do it? Certainly, it appears simple, but it is very complex, and with the cross departments, community and other interests that are involved. We do need probity, we do need checks and balances, we need infrastructural reports. We have to give that surety to the process, and we need that in written format and responses. The Murchison community is and will be continually supported by Council at various levels through other various streams as well. We will only be the landlord in this particular negotiation, and nothing more than that. This is an opportunity that the Murchison community, the local families and the elderly, that they need and that we can actually facilitate. So I applaud Councillor Abdullah and look forward to seeing where we go with this.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak against the motion? Would any council wish to speak for the motion? Prior to going to the vote, I wish to make a few comments. Obviously, I'm extremely supportive of the Murchison community and DP Jones Nursing Home. Obviously, we have all had concerns around the table, hence why there's been some conflicting discussions. I think my view was that we were already expressing interest in what we are doing. You know, so my personal opinion was we have already got that process happening. We were just waiting for more processes to come back to us in regard to some of the information we need so that we can actually continue to investigate this opportunity. So in my eyes, we already had an expression of interest in what we were doing in regard to the original recommendation, and it was purely just working with obviously Damien and obviously with the Murchison community and the committee and others to really look at what council's obligation is. And I don't think we obviously haven't got all of that information as yet. But in saying that, I do feel we already have an expression of interest in place. So that's my comment. We will now go... Oh, sorry, Councillor Abdullah, your right of reply. Sorry, I apologise for that. Yes.
Thank you. Look, I'll be very brief. In terms of the concerns that have been raised in terms of the risks, I just want to emphasize that look at the motion, it includes, the EOI is subject to, and the subject to conditions are really broad, and I do not think that they are exposing council to any more than what the original recommendation was. So that's what I would want to point out. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Councillors will now go to page 22, item 9.3, establishment of an LGBTIQA+ advisory committee. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Summer.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move that the council, number 1, approve the establishment of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, asexual and other sexuality, sex and gender diverse advisory committee, in brackets, LGBTIQA+ advisory committee as presented in this report, and 2, adopt an interim terms of reference for future review upon the establishment of the LGBTIQA+ advisory committee.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Spinks. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. This is a very dynamic space and it has particular relevance to our community. It's in a constant state of flux, really. These identities are still being worked out and considered, and it takes a lot of support from the broader community for people to feel comfortable in their own skin. And even that very long abbreviation there, my understanding was that it was just LGBTI+, but even that seems to have changed recently. So that's one example of how it can be in a state of flux. So it's understood that both gender and sexuality are not binary and they're on a spectrum, and we need to understand a bit more about that in order to be inclusive, and this committee will keep us up to date. It'll give us constant input from the source and help us achieve that goal of inclusion. So I originally put forward the notice of motion to establish a committee such as this because our infrastructure wasn't necessarily inclusive. There was a public toilet that had a submission from a GV Pride member because there was no option for a gender-neutral cubicle, and we did end up putting that in there, but we could have been on the front foot instead of backtracking. And I do hope that future projects will be vetted by this committee, much the same way as our Disability Advisory Committee ensures that, or our previous Disability Advisory Committee ensures we comply with the universal access standards. So the majority of this population group experience disadvantage on almost every scale, particularly suicide, mental health, substance abuse, and self-harm. So although there's a large emphasis on gender in the terms of reference, we also need to focus on other elements such as sexuality, for instance. We're putting somebody, well, hopefully putting somebody in there who sits on the Women's Charter Advisory Committee in order to, I think it's a cross-sectional education thing, which is fine. It's early days in the committee, and I have faith that any kinks will be resolved within the committee itself. But I do want to thank the council for their progressive stance on this matter, because this will result in better public health outcomes for families, allies, and people who identify as LGBTI+. It's a really important space, and I think we're being leaders in that field.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to echo everything that Councillor Summer just said. That was fabulous. But also to expand on the fact that this is all of our advisory committees, and this one inclusive and especially, are our way that we can have our communities better represented to our council. This is a way when we talk about community, there are so many subsections of what that really means out there, walking around on the streets and in our communities. And this is another way to make sure that a particularly vulnerable but also incredibly diverse and proud part of our community can have a voice at the table. This is a way that we create space for them to have their needs heard, and to make sure that they are seen, recognised, and have a place to let us know what we can do better to create an inclusive space for every person that exists within our community and across our community. The LGBTIQA+ spectrum is anything you can think of. It's the idea of a human being's identity being what they truly feel it to be or know it to be. And this is our way that we can create or make sure that we are valuing that recognition and that we are making sure that we are listening. And we have a direct line by having this advisory committee. We have a direct line to make sure that they are heard and they are at the table, along with all of our various advisory committees. And it's very exciting to see this one finally be at the table as well.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Abdullah?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would just support what Councillor Spinks and Councillor Summer have just said. I'm very pleased and I congratulate the Council for taking this step and forming this advisory committee. And it just demonstrates that it is an inclusive community, and the Council is very inclusive. We not only hear from the majority groups, but minority groups, and their rights and interests are also protected in this community and municipality. So I'm very pleased and looking forward to seeing what recommendations and ideas will come forward through this advisory committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Just before we go to the vote, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Summer, because you were very much behind getting this committee to the table today and making this happen. So congratulations, and obviously this discussion now and going to the vote, you've been a very big part of putting this forward.
Careful, they'll vote against it now.
I know. Well, congratulations on getting it to the table anyway. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, will now go to page 27, item 10.1, the February 2021 monthly financial report. Would a council like to move a motion? Councillor Dobson?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move that the Council receive and note the February 2021 monthly financial report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brophy. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, and just a few points, if I can, Mayor O'Keefe. A couple of the pleasing things that I see, although COVID has really had something to do with it, but employee costs are projected to be $2.69 million less than the 2021 adopted budget. And we always like it when costs come in under budget. Also, materials and services projected to be 2.26 million less than the 2021 adopted budget, variance mainly in savings in training, consultants and fuel, along with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on council services. A couple of other notes that I've got here is that my old favourite, the ratio between current assets and current liabilities, I always see as the health stick of an organisation, and I see that our current assets over current liabilities is a whopping 240.52%. Now that's as against what we thought it might have been, about 166%. So there probably does come a time when you look at your current assets and see whether or not that ratio is too high. But at the moment, coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that's a very healthy outlook. And I also note in the long-term liabilities that our interest-bearing long-term liabilities is 14 million. Cash flow statements to me are an important issue. It's whether or not the business can substantiate itself, can run on its own without help from outsiders, and I note that the net cash inflow from operations is $29 million. The capital works on page 48 is substantial, but if I can get this thing to work, I'll go back to the monthly financial report, which I probably can't do this here now. The monthly financial report, which I won't because I can't pick it up on my computer at the moment, but somebody else might want to comment on it. It's in a very healthy position, so I commend this report to Council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Councillor Brophy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just reiterating what Councillor Dobson did say there, that it is a better than forecast result, and certainly congratulations to the Finance Department on presenting those results, and also to Council in the way that they've gone about achieving that at this point in time. We're at a very crucial point in regards to finances at the moment, because we're about to finish up with JobKeeper, and we'll see how that impacts over the fiscal rest of this year. There is an upbeat mood currently at the moment with the less of the COVID restrictions that are in place. There is certainly a lot of economic, a lot of commercial, agricultural activity in Greater Shepparton. That's happening right at the moment, and it's very pleasing to see, and I think these results are coming through in terms of the way that we're handling the finances, but it will be very interesting beyond March what happens therefore, and the impact that it'll have financially.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak against the motion? Would any council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
I just wanted to thank the Finance Department staff, because they've been communicating this information really effectively based on the way that we learn, and we're all different. It's not an easy thing to get your head around at the best of times, in particular if you're a new councillor. And they've even done some work around by excluding the Working for Victoria grant, which shows us a bit more of a real impact on how COVID has affected us. And it's great to see people talking to this, because we've taken Director Chris Teitzel out of a job. We'd usually get him to speak to these motions, but this just goes to show that our understanding is really improved. As a group, we should be able to drill down and find some ongoing efficiencies, I'm hoping, especially in employee costs and materials and services, which was illustrated by Councillor Dobson. So perhaps it will have a positive impact on ratepayers when it gets to budget discussions, if we really become financially literate as a team.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Sarley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, look, I'd just like to follow on with some comments that have already been sort of mentioned, but just detail a bit more in that the capital works program is projected to be 58 million or 96% of the original budget for the full year, with council's aim to be over 90%. So we're obviously tracking well there. But further to that, obviously I mentioned $58 million is a significant investment into council projects within our community. So well done. And it needs a big team to achieve that, in particular the infrastructure team and our director Phil Hoare, who will be watching at home. So well done, mate. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now, Councillor Priestley.
Just a quick comment to say that we remain on track with our capital projects, but more specifically that we're now moving into a period where we're starting the discussion about setting rates and budgets for the next financial year. So it's a really important time for our council to think long and hard about how we want it to look. This new council, this is our chance to put our hands on those two very serious levers and set the tone for how we want things going forward.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 30, item 10.2, the Council Plan 2020 to 2021, the Quarter 2 Progress Report. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Summer.
I'm happy to move that the council note the Council Plan 2020 to 21 Quarter 2 Progress Report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dobson. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor O'Keefe. This is essentially a report card to the community. We set out a council plan 4 years ago, and this is us telling the community how we're going. And in some areas we're performing very strongly, and in some areas we can improve. So from reading this, it seems 34 out of 52 actions are on target, which does show plenty of room for improvement. So there could be a myriad of reasons for that. But what we're doing at the moment is leading into future discussions on the new council plan. And we're asking the public to comment on our community vision, which is accessible online. And you might see councillors out and about asking for your opinion. I've got the T-shirt on today. So I'd encourage the community to get involved in that and tell us what they want, because we're here to represent them. And if we get it right, it makes it easier for us and the organisation to achieve what the community want us to achieve.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I think Councillor Summer has wrapped it up pretty well, but noting the 5 themes, and a lot of these things are outside the bounds of what people really think that council's all about. Roads, rates and taxes are the normal outcomes that you think that people think that we operate under. But things like, and I'm particularly impressed about the environment, and last year the council passed a climate emergency policy, which in itself was controversial because the word emergency conjures up all sorts of things, but it opens up new fields to us as a council, and the environment going forward is probably one of the bigger planks of what we've got. The other one that I like to look at is the economic plank, the economic theme, a resilient economy, and we've got to be leaders in that space as well, and I think we're doing well. As Councillor Summer noted, that 34 out of the 52 are on target, the actions. I've noticed that we have been given a plan that says where the others are up to, and I'm sure by the end of the year we will be seeing a 52 out of 52.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Further to those comments, I'd just like to say that I guess this is the tail end of the plan for the last council, and we're working on our next plan. If we've got 18 out of 52, we're lagging behind. On first glance, that doesn't sound brilliant, but if you dig into that a little bit, there is a myriad of indicators, 52 indicators across a really wide range of things, and many of those indicators are impacted by the COVID period. So if you go and have a look, the reduced revenues as a result of COVID, so there's a slight impact on our underlying surplus. The number of active library members, having had the library closed for a significant period of time. The number of people participating in active living programs, again, the program having been closed for a significant period of time. So when you strip those numbers out, the statistics are actually really very favourable, and you just need to consider the COVID impact on that. The last thing I would say is that there are a number of statistics that, for example, might be tracking at 49 instead of the target of 50. So it's a pretty near miss.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 33, item 10.3, contracts awarded under delegation, February 2021. Would a council like to move a motion? Councillor Sali?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move the recommendation as a motion on page 33 of the agenda, item 10.3.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Summer? Councillor Sali, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. I was a little bit shocked actually this month because there's not a lot allocated. But there's plenty in the pipeline with a number of tenders still being advertised, which is good. Looking forward to seeing the outcome of Stage 1 Echuca Road Shared Path in Marupna, Bud Lighting, which I found out is a technical term for fairy lights within our CBD, the upgrade of the sound system right here in Eastbank, which is clearly really important with events starting to take place again, and also very important, the Sport 2050 Strategic Plan Review.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
This is my favourite part of the agenda. When we get the agenda, I immediately skip to this because it's things councillors in the community aren't necessarily aware of because it's under delegation. So it's usually only very big budget items that come to us. But I just want to mention that most of these items are not Shepparton-centric. There's Toolamba, Marupna, Merrigum, in Cosgrove landfill. So it's nice to see we're not Shep-centric, as is often implied by some of the public. So it's here in black and white. We are spreading resources around as much as possible and value small towns.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 36, item 11.1, application of the public acquisition overlay to realise regional infrastructure. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor James?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 36.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Abdullah. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Council has spoken with landowners regarding the need to develop the pathways, clearly identified there, and negotiation has taken place with the landowners. These pathways have many advantages from a social and an economical viewpoint. It will improve the connectability with existing pathways, and we have some great pathways and routes already established across Causeway in the back of around Aqua Moves, and this will enhance the tourism possibilities as well. Public acquisition overlay, POA, identifies land that is proposed to be identified by government or municipal council to reserve a land for public purposes. So a planning scheme amendment is required to apply the PAO to the land.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would just like to add that, of course, these parcels of land have been identified, and it is basically to continue to build our walking and cycling network. It is in line with the aspirations of Greater Shepparton, as it was identified in the Greater Shepparton 2030 Strategy 2006 and the Greater Shepparton City Council Plan 2017 to develop walking and cycling across the municipality. We also know that from a well-being and tourism perspective, we want to ensure that we have connected shared and recreational paths which the public can utilize. But we also know that in many cases, to construct these missing links, council has to utilize the paths which are under private ownership. So this motion is about a similar situation where council has to acquire these 3 parcels of land to construct the cycling and walking network. This is effectively, it's a procedural motion to go through the next steps in the planning process. Applying this overlay does not mean that the council has to purchase the land until council decides to start that acquisition process. So it will have a consultation process with the landholders, and if there are any submissions which cannot be resolved, these will be taken to the independent planning panel. So yes, it is a procedural motion at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak against the motion? Would any council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. In one of these, if not 2 of these acquisitions, it's over private property, and this acquisition process will now give certainty to those landowners who have been in limbo to a certain extent, and I'm aware of at least one of them that it's been a bit disruptive for them, but hopefully now that they can get some surety in what they're doing. The acquisition, this is the first stage of this exercise, but it's an important acquisition. Both the 3 of them are important acquisitions because the linking up of our walking paths is part of the beauty of Shepparton. It was some time ago that Shepparton, I think it was back in about 2012 or somewhere around there, we were number 2 in Australia for walking paths. I don't know whether that's been upgraded. Somebody else might be able to tell me. But it's great for our tourism, and it is great for for people who want to have exercise. And some of these paths go around some of our more beautiful areas around the river. So what we're doing here is utilising low-lying land that can't be built on, but can be used for recreational purposes. And it's not difficult to understand that some of these paths are why people want to come and visit Shepparton, because they have bikes. I'd like to think that at some stage we will acquire more in this space and be like Bright, where you can go from Wangaratta to Bright on a rail trail. I'd like to see the day when this can be expanded out to obviously Dookie and even down to Murchison. So it's all interactive. It's a long-term process, but I'm glad to see that these acquisition plans have started the journey.
Thank you very much. Would any council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. When people see the words public acquisition overlay, they yawn a little bit and it's procedural. But when you then see, shared recreational paths, you get a little bit more interested. And I think being out on the roadshow currently at the moment with the community vision and council plan, so there's another plug, Councillor Summer, for that. I'm hearing vastly that that's what people really appreciate about our community in Greater Shepparton, and I think this particular application adds to that. It also underpins very much in a holistic way the 2030 zero emissions target as well, because we're opening up space, we're creating recreational paths, and for cyclists and for people walking. I just think it's terrific, and certainly supportive of it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brophy. Would any council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Obviously, we've talked about the fact we've got these magnificent paths at the moment, and to extend them is terrific. But I'd also just like to acknowledge, I guess, the families that are affected by this process. This is disruptive and difficult for them, and we just need to make sure as a council that we're dealing with them fairly and recognising their contribution to our overall community as part of this process.
Thank you very much. Would any other council wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Very passionate about footpaths. They are arguably our most underrated asset in terms of public health and wellbeing. It does have a significant impact on our quality of life, having access to footpaths, and many of our previous commission areas do not have safe footpath access, and that can impact on their health. So again, I would like to flag the prospect again of perhaps implementing a 10-year capital works program to complete the Missing Links project and build on the good work that we are doing, and that will help us realise our active transport targets in the council plan, and cycling is one that we're not actually hitting the target on. So we may not get to cut a ribbon over a footpath, unfortunately, or maybe we could, but the ongoing positive health impacts of a very strong footpath network will last for generations, and if that's one thing we can complete, that Missing Link project, then I would sit quite comfortably that we have achieved something major for everybody who lives in the municipality.
Thank you very much, Councillor Summer. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 47, item 11.2, the grants distribution policy. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
I'd like to move a motion, please, Mayor O'Keefe, that the council adopts the grants distribution policy 43.2 POL1 with a footnote for clause 6D that should read, a report on awarded grants be prepared and presented to the executive leadership team and councillors in a briefing format and communicated formally at an ordinary council meeting.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Abdullah. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion? Sorry, before we do that, is everyone clear with the addition to that item? Yep.
Speak to it.
Okay. Would you like to speak to that item, Councillor Summer?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. It's basically just a bit of housekeeping that in the report we've been given, it does say that this information will be communicated at an ordinary meeting, but in the policy itself, it doesn't stipulate that that is the case. So I think it's just an oversight. So it's housekeeping to make sure it's in there. So overall, the policy has had some major changes. We're going to, well, we may. The staff will be in charge of distributing the grants, which is interesting, and that is another reason for this extra level of transparency to the community. We trialled it through COVID and was met with some success and efficiencies in terms of turnaround. So if we can get that funding out to the community sooner, I think everybody benefits, and we do have faith in our staff to deliver in the best possible way. I don't think we've ever objected to a grant, so I'm comfortable with it so long as all the grants that have been distributed are transparent and we're accountable for them at a public meeting.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I will support the motion, and as Councillor Summer has mentioned, it's adding just one more point to the original recommendation, which is about bringing the grants distribution report back to the ordinary council meeting for noting. And I'm very pleased that council has been flexible and has reviewed its process so as to bring more efficiency and to sort of make the process quicker and faster. So I think it will benefit everyone, and overall I'm very happy with the grants distribution policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Spinks?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I just want to mention that this would be a silver lining of COVID, I suppose, that we are able to have this change. We have the trust in our staff that they will follow. We have the policy in place and the trust in our staff that these processes will go ahead as intended, but what it allows us to do with this reduced time frame of getting our grants to go through, it allows us to be more adaptive and responsive to our community's needs, and it provides more opportunity for community to be involved in our grants processes, to have a go at creating things that are going to benefit our community, and simply reduces the barriers that they're up against in doing these things. So I think that the shorter time frame overall will prove to be a long-standing benefit, and it's exciting that we were able to pull this out of the experience that was 2020.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 53, item 11.3, adoption of Shepparton and Mooroopna 2050 Regional City Growth Plan. Would a council like to move a motion? Councillor Priestley?
Before we do, I'll declare that conflict of interest.
Oh, thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Councillor Priestley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move not the motion that is printed in the agenda today, but that the council defer consideration of item 11.3, adoption of the Shepparton Mooroopna 2050 Regional Growth Plan, to an additional council meeting which is to be scheduled on Tuesday the 30th of March 2021 at 5:30 p.m.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sarley?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just briefly, Mayor O'Keefe, obviously there's a lot of community interest and anticipation in resolving the adoption of a 2050 growth plan. It has been a very, very significant undertaking for new councillors to come to terms with 4 years of work arriving at this point, and that we just need a little bit more time. There are councillors in the room that need a little bit more time to work through this, and so we'll be dealing to it on the 30th of March 2021 at 5:30.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sarley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, and echo the comments of Councillor Priestley there, but yeah, really looking forward to having this resolved on the 30th of March.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Could we please let Councillor Dobson know that he can please come back into the room? Councillors, we now go to page 70, item 12.1, our supporting future funding guidelines for adoption. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Abdullah?
I would like to move the recommendation on page 70, move that recommendation as a motion, that the council adopt the updated Our Sporting Future funding guidelines to be implemented for round 1, 2021-2022.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sarley?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to that motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just briefly, Our Sporting Future has been a very successful grants program that has been run by council, and it offers 2 rounds of grants every year to sports clubs, and it has been doing it since 2009. They have benefited in the past from these grants. This motion is basically asking to adopt the revised guidelines for the Sporting Future funding grants. At the moment, there are 3 categories of the grants. One is about major facility development, and it is for projects on a dollar-to-dollar basis, but not exceeding 30,000. Secondly, the guideline is about another category of minor facility development, and the third one is sports aid. So in this guideline, the guideline has been updated to include 2 additional categories, and these are Our Sporting Future Women's and Girls and Our Sporting Future Youth Participation. Well, I am delighted to see these additional categories, because these categories are going to encourage women in sports, and also will encourage youth participation in sports for teams or sports between 16 and 18 years of age, where there has been sort of some decrease in participation. So I believe it's a great initiative. It focuses on women and youth. gender equality, inclusiveness, and youth, they are all well worth areas for council to take a leadership role. So I'm really glad to see that this, especially in this in the category for women, this gender lens has been applied to the sporting grants policy. And I also hope, and I would request my fellow councillor Sam Spinks, who is the councillor representative on Women's Charter Advisory Committee, to share this initiative with the Women's Charter Advisory Committee that has the gender equity as one of the guiding principles, and so that the committee is across the outcomes of this policy update. There is no financial impact of the revisions, as the total budget for this grants remains the same at $160,000. So I'm very pleased to support this update.
Thank you very much. Councillor Saleh, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, well, thank you. And Councillor Abdullah mentioned some very important points with this funding, but we can all see the expansion of girls and women's sports continuing to grow, and it's further enhanced with the national coverage of AFLW in more recent years. In some sectors, female sports is still so raw, and the ability for organisations to now apply for financial support to help increase awareness and upskill those involved will make sure female sports continue to prosper. But adding to that, and it is a concern, that we are seeing a drop in participation in sport with youth aged between 16 and 18 years of age. With so many other distractions and the ongoing cost to play sport, certain organisations have limited funds to invest and give reason for our youth to be active and even consider competitive sport. I really hope for so many reasons this is successful, as it's so important for our youth to be engaged in some form of active sport.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I was very pleased to see this come before council, the updated funding for our sporting future. I think Councillor Saleh and certainly Councillor Abdullah have sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of getting more women and girls participating in sport. Yes, in AFLW, you only have to look at now that from the national teams, the Matildas, the women's cricket on a national scale, and it is increasing there, and it's really good to see that we're actually being very proactive in making sure that that continues. And also particularly in the youth participation where they've dropped off. There is a changing sporting environment where they've got jobs to go to and other things now and other competing interests. So there's been certainly a downturn if you have a look across the traditionals of cricket and tennis, etc., in the local area. So to get them in there, and particularly with the new migrant families that have come into the region as well, you know, they could tap into both that, both in the women's and girls and also the youth participation as well. So very pleased to see this come before us.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 75, item 12.2, the State Government additional $2.5 million for the new SAM delegation alteration. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Priestley?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the recommendation as printed on page 75 of the agenda, that the Council authorise the Chief Executive Officer, CEO, to approve all post-award variations for a cumulative value of $3.45 million, including GST, for the following: Contract 1865 Construction and Contract 1732 Architectural and Engineer.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dobson. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. So to be clear, what we're talking about here is no new money out of Council's pocket here, and in fact what we're really talking about is that our community is in a better financial position as a result of an additional grant received from the state government. The state have provided us with an additional $2.75 million, including GST, with that money being tied to some additional features to be included in SAM, such as a barbecue shelter and some additional lighting and display features. This motion allows the council to spend some of that grant money via an already existing contract with the builder of SAM. So they have full control over the site rather than introducing a new contractor to the site. This is logical, so all the responsibility, if there are any issues with the construction of these features, lies with one contractor, and we're not stuck between two contractors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd just like to back what Councillor Priestley has said. the fact that not very often we get additional funds from the state government, but it's done a couple of good things, and one of them is the commercial kitchen fit-out. In itself will be an asset on the basis that we can now use that to attract a very good tenant to accompany the SAM building as it stands. And the other area which I was very pleased about is that the cultural ceremonial area can now be completed, because with Kaila Arts on the ground floor, this cultural ceremonial area is straight outside their doors, and so it shows good flow. And it's right in amongst those lovely gum trees. And this is becoming a huge asset, and we're all excited to know when the fences are coming down. So we're waiting on bated breath, but I believe at the end of the month we'll be pretty close to the mark. So with those good things, I'm very happy to support this motion.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer.
Thank you. It is good news that this money has come from state, and my understanding is that it reduces the previous authorised delegated variation that we had there. So it's actually reducing our own cost, which is great. SAM was originally costed at about $30 million, and now it is in excess of $50 million. And we've needed to cut quite a lot of smaller additions out of the budget in order to proceed. So, as stated by Councillor Dobson, this cash injection will enable us to complete some of those smaller projects that we did have planned, and hopefully it will all culminate to make SAM a success, which is what we all want. So thank you, state government. We will spend it wisely.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 79, item 13.1, documents for signing and sealing. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Priestley.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 79 that the Council authorises the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal the following document. Deed of gift between Carrillo Gantner, Shepparton Art Museum Limited and Greater Shepparton City Council.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Summer. Councillor Priestley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. So I'd just like to acknowledge the incredible contribution of Carrillo Gantner to the Shepparton Art Museum. This is an amazing gift to our community and to the public of this area and the public of Victoria and Australia. And it really is an astonishing act of generosity, and I personally am very thankful, and I think there are many, many in our community that would like to extend that same thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited to finally see this deed. Carrillo Gantner, as we know, approached us about building this gallery, and his collection was one of the reasons put to us for building the new SAM. And we were always promised the lion's share of his collection, but there was never any detail behind what that might look like. And personally, I believe we should have seen this deed and what was included well before any movement on the project, but it is what it is, and here we are. But pleasingly, this does look like a very exciting and extensive collection of Indigenous art, and it includes some work, probably not allowed to say who, but from some very prestigious artists, and it will complement the Kaila Gallery, and it will position us as leaders of Indigenous art and art culture within Victoria and beyond. It's going to get a lot of attention from critics, and I believe it's highly marketable in its own genre of Carrillo Gantner himself. So it's with some relief that I can finally offer my support for the deed that started all this.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Can I please also add that I have met Carrillo a number of times and also Zinyan Gantner as well, and they're very, very proud to actually offer this to our community. They don't live in our community, so I'm extremely grateful for this wonderful opportunity that we can have this world-class offerings within the SAM building. So I absolutely extend my gratitude, and I'm sure you will join me in that, to have such an incredible, millions of dollars, worth of works that we are, getting for SAM. So my heartfelt thank you. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Sorry, did you read?
Yeah, can I just make one comment just quickly before we...
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, America. This gift will no doubt bring prestige to the art gallery, but it'll also, more importantly, bring visitors, because some of these artworks are beyond belief. And I think that the sooner we can get these artworks within the gallery itself, the sooner we will get the visitors coming in and the money will start flowing, and who knows that we may be able to find additional people as benefit to us as benefactors, or them as benefactors to the art gallery. So I think it has a double-edged sword to it, if that's the right terminology.
Thank you very much. It certainly is. We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 80, item 14.1, designation of confidentiality of information. Would a councillor like to move the recommendation?
I'll move that, Councillor O'Keefe. The recommendation that pursuant to section 66(1) of the Local Government Act 2020, resolve that the council meeting be closed to the members of the public for consideration of a confidential item.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Spinks. All those in favour?
Sorry, Mayor O'Keefe, before you put that, I might declare a conflict of interest and leave the building.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So do we have a seconder? Councillor Spinks. All those in favour? Motion carried. Unopposed. So the live stream will now stop as we go to this confidential part of our agenda. Councillors, we now go to page 81, item 15.11, Councillor Activities, January and February 2021. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor James?
Thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 81.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Spinks. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, just to note that the feedback from our community is extremely positive about councillors out in our community, and I think that's a great feedback for us, great for our community to see our councillors out, and again, great to see our councillors supporting all functions that's been held across and throughout the community. Extremely pleased with the attendance of councillors and community at the clean-up days. 2.5 tonnes of rubbish extracted from the river is very pleasing. We've got some great comments about that. Very pleasing from that point of view. And just to say special thank you to our Mayor, Kim O'Keefe, too, for all your efforts of getting out. Must be very exhausting, and you've done a great job.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to the motion?
We were all told that, we all thought, last month's list was pretty long. And we're told that this was normal to be out and about, and this is obviously looking much healthier, I suppose, coming out the back of COVID. There have been some incredible opportunities for us to get out and about and to be involved with the large variety of activities that are in this list. For myself, and I'm sure others, it's been an honour to be involved. And I think also the community should be commended for the wide variety of things that we have going on. The list here is only the tip of the iceberg of the different things that are happening across our community, and these are the ones that we were able to get to, and each was absolutely fabulous, of course, but I can guarantee there would be a list exponentially longer of things that we didn't get to. So the community is to be commended for the incredible variety of options that we have of people being engaged and involved across Greater Shepparton.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Just briefly to say that, yes, not only is it great to see people out and about, you cannot replicate the one-on-one conversations that you have out in the community. These are the listing of some of the official things that we've been invited to or we've gone along to. Unofficially, when you're a councillor, invariably you're always out in the community and you're always out there seeing people. I commend all of the fellow councillors. Just another plug for the community vision and council plan. So, we've been out on the roadshow. Again, it's been great. If you haven't had your opportunity, let us know your thoughts and get online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Can I just add final comments before we head to the vote? I'd say thank you to all the councillors for being so dedicated and committed. It's been a very, very busy time inside the council building. For you all to commit so extensively outside the building is commendable, and I really love to see the excitement and enthusiasm and the commitment that I see with my fellow councillors at the moment. So let's keep it up. Well done. And we'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 83, item 15.2. There is the Murray-Darling Association report from Councillor Dobson. There is a recommendation on page 84. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I'll move that the council note Councillor Dobson's report on the Murray-Darling Association.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor James. Councillor Dobson, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just a quick update. Yesterday, myself and the Mayor, our Chief Exec and our Sustainability Director were able to meet the Chair of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority here in Shepparton and a big team of people from Golden Murray Water, etc. And we were able to put to the Chair our concerns regarding the choke on the Murray River in the Barmer National Park. We have a differencing of opinion, I think, as to the river is silting up, and we have a differing of opinion as to where that silt may come from. But it's definitely a problem in the choke, and there was 2 or 3 ideas put forward as to how that could be remedied. One of them, which I don't think anybody wants, is a bypass, and we really don't want that issue. I would have liked Councillor James to be with us to put a perspective, but I'm asking Councillor James to accompany me on the next Murray-Darling Association meeting, hopefully in Barmer at the Yenbina Centre, to discuss the Aboriginal perspective of the Murray River and what it all means. And furthermore, in May, there's the National Conference of the Murray-Darling Association, where all the councils right throughout the Murray-Darling Basin, from Queensland through to Victoria, will be in the one room at the one time and putting some joint communiques out on how we see it. There are problems, and I would like to commend our Chief Exec, Peter Harriott, who was quite forceful in putting forward the problems associated with this district because of water being taken from us, socio-economic problems being at the forefront. So this is a good association to be in. We're going to be very busy with it over the next few years, so I commend the report to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Councillor James, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor O'Keefe. Firstly, just thank Councillor Dobson for his passion towards waterways in our system. I was fortunate to be involved in discussions with the Yorta Yorta Elders Council and members of the Murray-Darling Association, and it was really exciting to put our viewpoint in regards to the Barmer choke. So that's information that Councillor Dobson and I are looking at working together down the track on that, but really important to see that the choke, the areas of the Barmer choke and the Barmer River are of concern for us locally, more importantly for our Indigenous people, but for all river users along the Murray system. So there are a number of recommendations that the Yorta Yorta Elders have put forward, and certainly Councillor Dobson is acting as a conduit, working for us too in that area. So extremely pleased about the positive way in which that's been portrayed from our council, and it's good to see that our council are making a commitment towards that, and just commend Councillor Dobson for his efforts.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brophy?
Just very briefly, Mayor O'Keefe, again commending Councillor Dobson with his passion, particularly in regards to the riverways. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority Chair, as you were saying, was down here. I had the fortunate experience to meet him this morning. He was very impressed with the meeting that went yesterday, so well done on that. And also for the GMID group, who are always promoting our particular region, and I think we're a very strong voice across the whole basin, so well done.
Thank you very much. Would any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried, unopposed. Councillors, we now go to page 85, item 15.3, notice of motion. We have two. The first one, item 15.3, number 1, notice of motion 2/2021 LGBTIQA+. Would someone like to move that recommendation? Councillor Spinks.
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I would like to move the recommendation to a motion that the council prepare a report to 1, install a permanent rainbow footpath at a public location within the municipality, 2, fly the LGBTQIA+ rainbow flag from the Greater Shepparton City Council office buildings all year round and ongoing, and 3, publicly acknowledge the LGBTQIA+ annual days of celebration and significance in 2021 and on subsequent dates in the years ahead, utilising the Greater Shepparton City Council media platforms such as social media and media statements, with dates including but not limited to the Transgender Visibility Day on the 31st of March, International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersex Phobia and Transphobia, Ida Hobbit Day on 17th of May, LGBT Pride Month, the whole of June, International Non-Binary People's Day, the 14th of July, Wear It Purple Day, the 27th of August, National Coming Out Day on the 11th of October, and World AIDS Day on the 1st of December.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Summer. Councillor Spinks, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. I have created this notice of motion because these particular items were requested from both within our local community and outside of it as a way to better support and celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community. During our campaigns, a rainbow pledge was sent around to all the candidates across Victoria, and a number of us signed agreeing to create a more inclusive and celebratory Greater Shepparton. Since being elected, I have spoken with a number of members of the local LGBTQIA+ community about what they would like to see locally, and these items were put forward, and so now I am putting them to the council. The LGBTQIA+ community is diverse and beautiful and yet continues to face ongoing prejudice and discrimination. Research shows that LGBTQIA+ individuals have an increased risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, self-harming and suicidal thoughts, as well as a high risk of social exclusion, discrimination, verbal abuse and physical abuse. During my campaign, I was asked if this type of thing was really the business of council, and I answered with a resounding yes. I believe that part of council's role is to show leadership in creating an inclusive, safe and accessible region. While this particular motion may not be relevant to all members of our community, there are many that this is essential for. For those who are just discovering who they are and are scared of how they will be treated, and to those who are out and proud while enduring prejudice and discrimination. They are the people who this motion is for, and I am very proud to put this motion to council on their behalf. I hope that you will each consider the positive and powerful impact that these simple actions can have for such a vulnerable part of our community. I experienced a moment like this recently when I was working with an LGBT young person. At the time, I commented on liking his pronoun badge, and when the next day I turned up, deliberately wearing my own ally badge, he was delighted and we launched into a chat about the struggles of being accepted. The simple and visible things matter. It has been raised that there may be costs or flag protocols that we will have to consider for these actions to occur, but I feel absolutely no concern about this because it is exactly why I'm calling for a report. We must make informed decisions, and this report will enable us to gather the information we require. A further concern raised is that this motion is essentially doing the work for the recently appointed LGBTQIA+ committee. However, I disagree. I see these actions as giving them a strong, supportive foundation to work from. The committee is supposed to advise us when we don't know something, but this one we know. So they shouldn't have to do all the hard yards when we have the knowledge and capacity to take action. The committee's role will be to advise, but ultimately it will still be the council's decision to make. I know that as a council we will do much grander things in our 4 years, but for me this is a small but strong way to show that we really do stand for community, and that by the end of our term we will have created a more inclusive and accepting Greater Shepparton. Every time a member of the LGBTQIA+ committee sees the flag flying or walks on the footpath or sees a social media post, they will know that they are welcome.
Would you like an extension, Councillor?
I have 3 lines left.
Extension granted. Yep.
Thank you. Every time a member of the LGBTQIA+ community sees the flag flying or walks on the footpath or sees a social media post, they will know that they are welcome in Greater Shepparton, that they are seen, that they are heard, and that they are supported. And this report will enable us to make an informed decision around these possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would love to. Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's nothing more I could add to that. That was incredible in what Councillor Spinks said, and I'm so excited to see a motion like this come up. Traditionally, we've been quite a conservative council, so I'm excited about this. I don't know if it's because there's a younger crew or just a more diverse crew, but it's good that we're getting into pockets of the community that really need us to support them. And the more visible that we can be, as you said, the more welcome people feel. So even these public discussions are helping to remove the stigma and reduce the barriers that do impact our most vulnerable residents. And I can't wait to start seeing rainbows all over the place. So bring it on. I think it's great.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Saleh?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Yeah, look, I really appreciate Councillor Spink's recommendation, but we've just endorsed an LGBTIQA+ committee. I'm a big believer in making sure that when we request the need of a committee to help address any potential barriers in our community, that we task them to do that with the whole community. I think we should let the dust settle, let them formalise their committee and work towards identifying if Greater Shepparton can do better and perhaps bring forward some of those recommendations Councillor Spinks has shared. We need to encourage our community to get involved with committees, but by supporting this motion, I believe we devalue the relevance of a committee, especially one that was just endorsed. For those reasons, I can't support this motion.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Brophy?
I am speaking against the motion, but I must say that I do commend Councillor Spinks for her very first notice of motion. I think it's excellently put together. I think her passion, and I certainly support her passion. I'm very happy to promote the LGBTI community, as well as, and I've been involved in other activities in promoting them as well. I do believe, though, that the new advisory committee will probably put a lot of these things forward, which I'm very happy to support in some of those. I just think it's that a better process than calling for a report at this point in time. We'll probably differ on that, Councillor Spinks, but I certainly support your enthusiasm and your passion for it in this particular nomination, but or motion, notice of motion. But unfortunately, I can't support it.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Abdullah?
Thank you. I support this motion for the reasons that Councillor Spinks and Councillor Summer have mentioned. I believe that, and I do acknowledge the concerns raised by Councillor Saleh and Councillor Brophy about the advisory committee. Perhaps there's going to be a overlap of the work. I do not see it that way. I feel that advisory committee will still have a very important role, but to prepare a report. So at this stage, this motion is only about preparing a report to highlight all the elements that are included in this motion. So it is not about a final decision. It's giving a direction to council officers to prepare a report. And it is normal for officers to prepare these kinds of reports. Advisory committee, also we need to sort of understand that sometimes advisory committee is not responsible for doing the job of a council. It is there to prepare and prepare recommendations and advice. It is not a decision-making authority. So at the end of the day, it is council that has to decide whether it's coming from the council officers or as a set of recommendations from the advisory committee. So I'm quite satisfied that we are following the right process. And I'm looking forward to the report. I would not comment anything about what the final decision would be, but I support that this report should be prepared.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion?
Thank you.
Councillor Dobson?
Yes, I'm sitting here not wanting to do this, but I just think that I agree with Councillor Saleh that the advisory committee, who will have experts in the field on the issues surrounding the community, the LGBTIQA plus community, and I think we need that input. The council officers need the input from these folk to give us a raft of what's best for the community, because they will be the experts. So, As much as I like the idea, I think the better way in my mind to go about it, Councillor Spinks, is through the advisory committee. But I commend you on bringing it forward, and I'm waiting to see what the advisory committee will bring to the table.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Priestley?
I'm happy to receive the report and hear what it's got to say. I think it's good to have the information and to understand the issues so that we can have informed discussion on this area. There's lots for, I think, myself and the broader community to come to understand, and for that reason I would value a report to understand those issues.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? So prior going to the vote, I'd just like to add my comments. Thank you so much, Councillor Spinks, for this report. But in my eyes, council laws should not be making these decisions. We need this information brought to us so we can make more informed decisions. And I would like to know if the committee look at this as some of their priorities. I support all the things that you've put up, Councillor Spinks, but I believe we are setting up a committee so that we can have that information brought to us. And I'd like to take these items to that committee so that they can have that discussion, because they may have much bigger or different priorities to what we are actually tabling tonight. So my opinion is that let's give this to the committee. Let's really launch that committee with some wonderful suggestions. But I do not believe councillors should be making these decisions. That's why we are putting this committee up, so that we can have more informed information to actually support recommendations. So I believe the committee is actually, will have that job, and they'll be able to work together, and we can work with the committee, and then hopefully we will get some ideas of their priorities and what that looks like. So I actually
Point of
won't be supporting.
clarification, Mayor O'Keefe, just about the comment that you have made that that you do not think that councillors should be making this decision. I think councillors are responsible to make a decision. That is their role. We have been told, and I understand it very clearly, that advisory committee's role is not to make a decision. It is to prepare recommendations for council. So from that point of view, it is indeed a role of council to make the decisions. What I think the difference of opinion here is about who is providing recommendations. And my assumption is that while preparing this report, council officers will be speaking to subject matter experts and to the people who have lived experience of this minority group. So I really don't understand. Just to highlight that I do not believe that this comment about councillors should not be making this decision is 100%
Yeah, well,
right.
thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have not had any feedback in regard to these items that are listed tonight, so I'm not really understanding of where that's come from. So I would actually appreciate, in the future that we would have, perhaps more input into a report like that, where the actual feedback would have more content. So yeah, for that reason, I'm not supporting it tonight. Okay, we'll now go to the vote. All those.
Will I get a right of reply?
Oh, sorry, right to reply. So sorry, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a couple of points that were raised. These ideas, these suggestions did come from the community. It was a part of this Rainbow Pledge that was put to us during the council election campaign, and it was on speaking with members of the community since being elected about what they would like to see. These ideas, as much as I am a passionate ally, these ideas did not come out of my own brain. They were brought to me by the community. I'd also like to comment that I believe it is councillors' role to show leadership about making sure our community, all parts of our community, are seen, heard and included, and I don't think that we need to wait to make those decisions when it is being brought to us, when we have the opportunity to lead. And as well, I would also argue that the committee are going to have an awful lot of things that they could be working on. These are simply extremely visible and meaningful items that we could already have in place. And there are also already other places around Greater Shepparton that are doing these sort of items, and it's simply us catching up, I suppose. And in essence, we can essentially leave the committee to get on with the work that is their priorities. This might be on their list, but why can't we do both, would be my argument. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion lost.
Division, please, Madam Mayor.
Sure. All those in favour? Sorry, Councillor Abdullah, Councillor Priestley, Councillor Summer, Councillor Spinks. All those against? Councillor Dobson, Councillor Saley, Councillor James, Councillor Brophy and Councillor O'Keefe. Councillors, we'll now go to the next notice of motion, which will be 15.3 number 2. Notice of motion 3rd 2021 governance rules. Would a council like to move a motion?
I would love to move the motion as it's written on page 86 of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Priestley. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is essentially asking for a report on why we should or shouldn't need to ask for a report. So I put to you that this clause in our governance rules is superfluous, and that's because the governance rules already state that the CEO must inform councillors about the potential and cost implications of any proposed notice of motion. So the requirement for a report, and looking at it, there's not much you can get through without requiring this report, is unnecessary, and it's obstructive. It pushes out actions by at least 4 weeks to the next meeting and can be a wasteful use of resources. This is a relatively new clause, and I'm not aware of any other council that has this requirement, and I'm very keen to find out if this is common practice once we get this report. There is some urgency around getting the report because it's hard enough getting a notice of motion to the table without additional barriers. This motion was refused until I pushed the point. So as much as I'd love to strike the closeout immediately, we may need to wait until the governance rules are reviewed. Because even though we had only one submitter last time, it is a requirement under the Act to go to public consultation, and I look forward to that. I think that this will inform our conversation. And I do hope that we can look at all of our governance rules, because there's quite a few clauses in there that potentially hamstring the democratic process, and they don't need to be there. So in terms of the report itself, there is no need to commit any excessive resources to it. It can be done internally. There is no need to take it to a public meeting. None of that is listed in there. But I am very keen to hear what our governance team have to say when they come back to us. So I do hope you'll support me in this. It's just flagging something of concern that has been obstructive in the past and isn't necessarily positive or beneficial moving forward as a democratic team.
Thank you very much. Councillor Precy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Look, just to speak briefly, my position on this issue is not resolved, and I think the report will be helpful. If you look at the model rules provided by the state government, it does include a clause that's similar to this, although it doesn't include a value, I believe. I'm happy to stand corrected. But I guess it's about trying to strike the balance between pulling councillors up and making them fully understand the ramifications of their decisions, and maintaining a flexibility where council can move in response to urgent need or community views. And I haven't formed an opinion, but I think it's valuable for us to understand that. So,
Thank you very much. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Councillor Dobson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Keefe. Prepare a report, and what do we do with it? We then got to make a decision whether or not we act on that. My understanding about notices of motion, and the reason why these rules are here, is to ensure that councillors and council officers have full regard to what is being proposed in any notice of motion. I have witnessed over the last few years that some notices of motion have been on the fly, so to speak, and have caught people unawares, and it can cause great consternation by councillors and council officers. From council officers' point of view, a notice of motion has got to pass a few tests in terms of governance, not only the pub test, but it's more governance test. And I was going to put in a notice of motion there for last month, and I wrote the report and put it in. I was a couple of days too late, so we couldn't do it. So I'd like to have a report with any notice of motion, so that over the time I can completely examine the motion, as we do with all of the reports that come in from council officers, so that we can take it home and have a good study of it, ask questions and make comments. So I don't know whether this would mean anything, prepare a report, costings. We've got to come back then and do something with it. So for that reason, I'm happy with the system as it stands at the moment. I'm not so much against the notice of motion per se, but I'm pretty happy with the system as it stands at the moment. It doesn't concern me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dobson. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Springs?
Thank you. I'd just like to quickly speak in support of this motion. I think that our CEO already does a very good job of outlining the risks associated with notices of motion, as I got to witness this month, which was fabulous. And the reality is that these other bits that are highlighted in this notice of motion will be taken care of by the democratic process of the 9 people sitting around this table. We are capable of deciding when a report is necessary, I would argue. And to Councillor Dobson's point about things being put through on the fly, I would argue that we in ourselves would make the correct decision if we do not have enough information or we need further whatever it is, that we wouldn't vote for it, that it would naturally be taken care of through the process and through our roles that we are meant to be fulfilling. So for those reasons, I am supportive of this particular notice of motion.
Thank you very much. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Abdullah?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page, and it is my understanding that this motion is asking for a report to strike out these clauses, which according to Councillor Summer, they are not necessary. Now that's the decision, or that's a position which I may or may not agree with, as Councillor Priestley has also highlighted. But at this stage, this notice of motion is only asking the council officers to bring a report and for all of us to make an informed decision. And also it will give additional clarity to Councillor Summer. And I feel that, yeah, we have been through this whole process. Perhaps there were elements which were not clear to Councillor Summer, and it will give them, this report will give that additional information. As for me, by supporting this notice of motion, it is not my intent. I'm not supporting the actual future decision, because that decision has to be made based on that report. So it is the report that we are that Councillor Summer is asking for, not for striking out the clause immediately. Am I right? If I'm right, then
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that that's the position.
Okay. Would any councillor wish to speak against the motion? Would any councillor wish to speak for the motion? Would you like your right of reply, Councillor Summer?
Thank you very much, Mayor O'Keefe. So, in terms of Councillor Abdullah's comments, that is completely correct. And the motion itself is neutral. I might have my own strong views around this, but it's asking for a report. And no doubt there will be a report that comes to us that's probably in favour of retaining the clause. I would like to think that it's going to be objective and examine both sides and see if it really needs to be in there, and we can make that assertion once we get the report. So in regards to Councillor Dobson saying that we have rules and checks and balances and shouldn't be doing things on the fly, that is exactly why we have clause 62.3 of the governance rules. And as I said before, it states that the Chief Executive Officer must inform councillors about the potential and legal cost implications of any proposed notice of motion. Councillor Spinks is 110% correct that it will be filtered out by the democratic process if we put something up that shouldn't be there or is incongruent to community or whatever we believe at the time. But we should have every right to put it there for discussion. And that's why I have an issue with this clause. And if officers can come back and justify why it should be in there, that's fantastic. But it certainly warrants further discussion as a lead-in to reviewing our governance rules in totality.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, item 16 on page 87, urgent business not included on the agenda, nor received. Item 17, closing of the meeting. So I will now declare this meeting closed at 7:28. Thank you very much.